Our next guest began his career as one of the world's most prolific hackers. He's since reformed, thank goodness, and advises law enforcement agencies and large-scale organisations on cyber protection. Please welcome to the stage leeming. And we're doing this in conversation style. We've got two empty rows down the front here. If anybody from the back would like to reposition, please feel free to do that. Nice to meet you, Cal. Thank you for being with us today. So, how and why at the age of 10 were you not playing football or just playing on your Game Boy? Why did you get into hacking and how?
That's a good question. So, apologise if I have to take small moments, by the way. I've only just got over a bit of an illness, so I'm a bit out of breath, even when sitting down. I actually have a picture of when I was 10 years old, and there was me covered in mud, looking like any other 10-year-old would. And it was at that exact age that I also started hacking as well. And it was a bit of a weird disconnect because I was just like any other kid, but I also had... Oh, there you go. I didn't realise I had it. Oh, wow, there it is. Yeah, so that was me. I was very, very, very young. And it's really weird even just looking at it now. And I would just spend my time, I think in the end, about 12 hours a day during the weekends when I went to my grandparents, and that's where my computer was. And they were getting a bit concerned because I was spending a lot of time on this machine. And it was after about 3 months of me just solidly being on this machine, my grandparents and my mum as well realised, this kid really, really likes computers. And eventually I managed to figure out how to hook it up to the internet. I managed to get hold of a modem. That was a bloody pain in the ass. Then I managed to get onto AOL as well using my nan's credit card. Got my ass kicked for that, verbally that is. And so technically the first victim of my crime was my grandma when I was 10 years old.
But I still don't get, how you became a hacker though. How did you even know at that age sort of what you were doing?
So, I started, once I got online, I started using chat rooms and started talking to other people on the internet who, strangely enough, were actually the same age as me. I didn't know this at the time. I was just talking to these random people. They could have been really bad people for all I knew, but it turns out they were the same age as me. And they were also into hacking. We used to share information and share knowledge. There was no Google back in these days. I think it was Ask Jeeves and Alta Vista that we used to use. And so you just have to go and learn things yourself. You'd really have to understand what it was you're actually doing. And just through sharing information, through talking to people, I ended up escalating the level of crime I was doing. So what started out with just stealing what's called 0800 number dial-up accounts, which gave you free internet. That was like the nirvana. Right? You get one of those, free internet, jobs are good. And then escalated into credit card fraud, escalated into hacking into banks. I started buying high-value items, which I then sold for money so I could then buy food. And eventually, good old West Midlands police came and kicked down a door when I was 12 years old. And there was me, sat there, handcuffs, and there was my mum sat next to me in handcuffs, like, what the hell have you done, Cal? And she actually tried taking the rap for everything I did. But after about 10 minutes, so no, it was me.
Where was that muddy photograph taken then?
That was at my grandparents in Coventry.
In Coventry, so you're even a local boy then
Coventry
to this
lad,
region. Yeah. Okay, so suddenly you're the criminal. And is that when it came to an end, that day when you were sat next to your mum on the sofa with the policeman in your lounge? No,
sadly not. I actually asked my mum about this. Because a lot of my childhood I don't remember at all. There was just periods of blankness. And when I asked her about it, she said, well, actually, Cal, it was 4 days before Christmas, the first time you got arrested. And they took everything from the house, like literally everything. So went back to the house after being in cells for about 12 hours, and there was just nothing. And I remember sat there in my room, staring into an empty blank room. But that was about it. I don't remember much else. And it turns out the mind kind of blocks out traumatic events, and that was one of them.
And how old were you then?
I was 12 years old.
12. So he's 12 years old, okay. I wonder how West Midlands Police even dealt with it at that time. I mean, things have really come on since then.
Yeah, they definitely struggled because they didn't, I mean, this is back when it was the high-tech crime unit, right? right? So, and it's had multiple iterations since then. And the officers really wanted to help me. Admittedly, they did try and help me, but they couldn't give me the larger support network I needed. They couldn't fix some of the family issues I had. They couldn't fix some of the poverty issues that we had. So when I asked my mum about this, I said, how long did it take for me to get back into doing crime again? She says, you got a computer about a month later and then you started again.
So you were straight back online, straight back on the computer. When did it finally come to an end for you then? When did you become reformed?
So I carried on doing crime for about 6 years, and it got to the point where West Midlands Police they were getting bored of investigating this stuff. They had better things to do with the time. And so whenever I committed a crime and it got reported, and rather than coming around the house and locking me up, they would just phone up the house phone, because we had a house phone back in those days, and they would just say the words, Cal, effing stop, and put the phone down. True story as well, some of the officers. And it carried on until I was 18 years old, and one of the arresting officers in my case, a guy called DC Clive Reed from Swindon Police Force, he tracked down some of the fraud and hacking I was doing. And he managed to find enough evidence to cause some problems, and he gave me two options. He said, Cal, you've been on the run now for 2 years. You can either hand yourself in and you'll go to prison for a little bit, but you can start again, or I'm going to put you all over Crime Watch and I'm going to make your life very painful. Oh, wow, okay. So I negotiated my surrender, and although I was looking at 7 years, which was a long sentence to contemplate being on remand, I actually got 15 months, and I served 5. So I was very, very lucky. And that officer then put me back in front of some of my victims, put me back in front of one of the banks I hacked into. He gave me work references, supported some of my government applications, all sorts of stuff. Right? He really was instrumental in my rehabilitation. And I try and share that. That's why I share that story, right, for other officers, because he didn't have to do that. Right? He could have just thrown me to the wolves and be done with it. But even today, even 2 weeks ago, I still talk to the guy. So I try and share that story with other officers. So if they come across someone who they think they can genuinely help them. They may not listen to you first time. They may not listen to you at all, but you at least try.
But also you help the police. As you were saying a few minutes ago, we want these kids, we want to channel, okay, you hacked something, how did you do it? Tell us how you did it. I think this is what a lot of people, when you see that autistic boy that the Americans wanted extradited and put in the chains and the jumpsuit, why didn't they say, well, look, we don't want to extradite, you just tell us how you hacked into the Pentagon, because you've got the knowledge that the police need to fight the crime, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky and honoured to do some of the stuff I do today. I get to do a job that I love, which is working with families and individuals. That's my true calling in life, as well as being a software engineer, my two callings in life. And then on the other side, I get to work with the schools and do a lot of work in law enforcement, not only around preventative work, but also around training some of these officers as well. And it's incredible to think that 20 years later, I'd even be doing these things. The same people who were locking me up 20 years ago, I'm now helping train their team. It's just, it's mind-blowing.
So I'm sure you agree he has an amazing backstory, and I wanted to sort of set the scene really, but let's bring it up to date now. Looking at cybercrime today, give us an idea of some of the worst case scenarios that we could be facing.
So I think the previous talk that we heard was fantastic. It went into a lot of detail about the different motivations behind hacking, behind cybercrime. That covered a big part of it. But one of the worst I've seen so far is probably the 2014 photo leaks, right? Where and this also happened not just to celebrities, but also happened to a bunch of just everyday individuals as well. It was a site called Pink Meth that came along. And what ended up happening was a bunch of photos got leaked and a whole bunch of lives were ruined. Right? People have suffered ridiculous amounts of pain because of this. And I think we kind of forget sometimes that it's not just about, okay, there is financial crime that can happen, yeah, if someone steals your date of birth, your credit card details, bank details, whatever, they can go and stake some money, you have a little bit of pain for a couple of months getting the money back, hopefully you get it back. But what happens when your entire life gets leaked? What happens when you wake up one day and all your photos, your intimate photos all online, your inbox has been posted all over BitTorrent somewhere, you've got all of your sensitive data just being read and then dissected by news agencies for the whole world to then judge you on. Just imagine what it's like waking up to that at 7 a.m. in the morning, and that's a typical day for us, protecting people and helping them through that process, because it sucks. It absolutely sucks.
And as you pointed out, it's not just famous people. The effects on whole families and youngsters trying to grow up in a normal life in this country is going to be affected forever. Yeah, and yet most of us still think it's about bank accounts and finances, and that's what the introductions today both really sort of hit home for me. It's a lot more than just about bank accounts. So I was listening to one of your online films, and you even mentioned like water supplies being affected by hackers. Just embellish that story a little bit.
Sure. So there's a site called Shodan.io, I think it was, and you can go on there and you can look for machines that are connected to the internet. If you do go and do this, don't go clicking around on these machines, because that is technically a breach of the Computer Misuse Act. So don't go doing that. You can look, but don't touch. And that also applies to many other aspects of life. But I digress. So you can go around and you can have a look to see what's out there. And sometimes you will see power control systems. You will see effluent processing plants. You'll see water supply systems. If you went and clicked around it, you can increase or decrease the level of chlorine and various chemicals that are going into the water. You can really mess with critical national infrastructure, CNI. And so why does this even exist in the first place? Why is this problem even happening? Right? So there's a lot to be said about the preventative work. Right? That has to be done. But when the preventative work falls over, that's when the response efforts need to kick in. So there has to be a good balance between all of them. It's like when people say, "Oh, this one thing will solve all your cybersecurity issues." No, it's a multi-faceted thing. You've got to think about so many different elements. It's mind-boggling in some ways.
But basically, to hack a water system, you could decrease the amount of chlorine that put into the water to keep us all safe without the machine knowing that you've decreased the chlorine, and then we all start to get a little bit poorly, we all start to turn up at our local hospitals, and that's just one example of an amazing cyber crime that could affect our communities.
Yeah, so that was one where you can alter. Water supplies have sensors in them, right, to detect the levels of chemicals that are in the water. And what you can do is you can falsify the data coming back from these sensors. So you can change the amount of chemicals going to water, and then you can falsify the data coming back from the sensors. And from that, you can. But the only time people are going to realise something is wrong when people start going to hospital. It's bloody terrifying.
Terrifying all round. So let's talk about youngsters like you today. How should the police be dealing with the young offenders?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I'm very lucky again that I get to work with some of the prevention teams and to give this sort of advice. There's some kids that just need to be taught a lesson. They just need a little bit of a short, sharp shock. But the majority of them need that enhanced support network. Right? A lot of them have, shall we say, difficult backgrounds, or they don't have the support they need at home. Whatever it is, there's usually a bigger issue at hand as opposed to just the criminality aspect. I'm a firm believer that you should never throw those kids to the wolves unless you absolutely need to. Like, if they mess up really badly, yeah, okay, they're going to have to go through the criminal justice system, that's a given. But if you can prevent that from happening, if you can give them a chance, do try. Because once you throw them to the wolves, you can't get them back, right? That is going to affect them forever. Like me right now, every time I go and apply for a visa to go and visit the companies that I started there and to actually go and work the companies that I run there, I have to go through a 2-year approval process with Homeland Security just because of my criminal record. Right? So it's that long-lasting impact. And I never thought about that when I was a kid. Someone said to me, "Cal, you're not going to be able to go to the US," when I was 10. I was like, and? I wouldn't care. Whereas now, it's a huge problem because I can't run the companies that I built there. Right? I've had to hire other people to do that for me. It has a huge impact.
And what's amazing is that anybody who has access to a computer, anybody of any age, has access to become that type of criminal. You don't need any special kit, really. It's just a computer wherever you are. And whether it's your local library or at home, most people have access to that in this country now. So we all have the potential to go to the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. Hacking is de-skilled to the point that you spend a couple of $100, not even that, and you can go and buy the services for someone to go and hack for you. It even comes with 24/7, 365 support, which is just crazy, right? But it's a whole criminal empire. It used to be that hacking was about sharing information, and yeah, okay, you still had your organized criminal gangs at any point, but now it really is driven by power and money. It's a very different game than it was 20 years ago.
Well, I think we know already today that the police really do face a mammoth task on this one. It's difficult to say how big the task is ahead of them. In terms of law enforcement, is it a resource issue, or is it a skills issue, or is it a bit of both?
So if you want to see a deeper answer I gave to this with the NCCU, there's a video I did at Police Supers talking about this very same problem. The reality is that there's not enough resources within law enforcement. That's the reality. There's some fantastic resources available, but are only made available to very serious crimes, to very serious situations. Action fraud, I'll reserve my comments about action fraud. You've got the fact that when you're trying to hire skills or trying to bring people into law enforcement that have these skills, you can't hire those people because they will just go and get 2 or 3 times the amount of money in the private sector. So they train up those officers internally, and those officers then leave for the private sector as soon as they're done training. And that's happened. I've lost count of the amount of officers that I've trained who have now gone into the private sector, not just because of the lack of the problems around pay grading, but also because the problems around promotion as well. There's all sorts of issues that law enforcement have to deal with. But on the other side, there are some fantastic officers out there that grim and bear it, right? That do the right thing and that stay there to try and make a difference. And I have to commend those people because they are doing the jobs that no one else wants to. Right? They're doing the things that other people have now left to go and do in the private sector, who coincidentally then get hired back into law enforcement at twice the cost. Right? So it's a bit of a strange situation.
So you seem to be saying that we need a whole new sort of area of policing and a band of policing that doesn't correlate to your normal PC, sergeant, inspector ranks, pay grade and otherwise. We need a whole new band of men and women who are separate financially.
I think policing needs to reflect today's reality and environment. And I think I try and relay the frustrations that I hear from officers on the ground. And something has to change. Something has to be done.
Have you ever spoken to the Home Secretary?
There's 2 bits of advice I was ever given when I talk at conferences or do any sort of media thing. Number 1, never talk about politics. Number 2, never talk about religion. So I reserve my comments about those.
Okay, but they need to hear what you're saying. That's what I just wondered if you'd had a meeting with the Home Secretary. What's the best advice? We've got businesses large and small from across Staffordshire represented here today. What's the best advice you could give to them today?
That's a good question. Put pressure on governments and some of the security startups and some of the bigger companies to give away security products and services for free or a much more reduced cost. Security right now is effectively a privilege and a paid privilege at that. It is not something that small businesses can afford. You're spending to get any sort of decent level of security, you've either got to have a team of people that really know what they're doing, right, and just so happen to be in your company and want to stay there, which majority of people don't, or you have to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, and even then you still get your ass handed to you. Something's gotta change, right? But we're not there yet, and it sadly, I believe, is going to get worse before it gets better. And I know that's not a very positive note, but I'm a bit of a realist when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Carl Leeming, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.